You don't seek peace. Perhaps that's the cruelest lie ever told to you. You were taught that war is a mistake, an aberration of the human spirit, something to be corrected, healed, overcome. But look back now, with the courage of someone who has already lost too many battles pretending everything was fine. Those moments when you shrank yourself to avoid trouble, the countless times you swallowed the words you longed to shout, every whispered, "I'm fine," while something burned silently beneath. That wasn't peace. It was just another trench you dug to hide a conflict nobody else could see. You've been conditioned to believe that maturity means not reacting, that virtue lies in silent endurance, and true strength means bearing pain without exposing your wounds. Slowly, you became a specialist in quiet retreats, polite sacrifices, and feigned calm while chaos spread throughout your soul. Centuries ago, Thomas Hobbes revealed a brutal truth, not as a critique, but as a profound insight into your very nature. Man is the wolf of man. It's not a moral judgment. It's a raw, uncomfortable truth about the inner mechanisms that drive us all. The instinct to fight, to react, and to assert boundaries is not an evolutionary flaw. It's the primal condition of your existence. War, whether internal or external, isn't a malfunction in need of repair. It's the only place where your carefully crafted masks fall away, exposing your authentic self beneath. There, on the emotional battlefield, all pretenses collapse, and you're confronted with the harsh truth. Your real identity has been shredded by the constant effort to appear peaceful, adapted, normal. Behind your mask of passive kindness lies a truth you've been too afraid to face directly. You're not tired of war. You're tired of losing. You're not exhausted from fighting too much. You're drained from never truly fighting for what genuinely matters. Genuinely not something I want to say to you. If you're wondering about your mental health, I've actually been mentioned in many podcasts discussing the barriers I experience within families, professional circles, and in my own research. So I'm actually doing my very best to actively practice kindness and self-care so that I can have these conversations. Just realize, or I'll even get some negative feedback about things, and no one can do their job until they've experienced how I respond. In addition, I'm going through a really painful breakup as we speak. Becky broke up with me a few weeks ago, and she's mentioned something about the difficulties in relationships. But you know what? I don't even care, because I know that when things settle, I'll be back in the best position to help others the best I can. All I can do is continue to settle my noise. You don't seek peace. Perhaps that's the cruelest lie ever told to you. You were taught your battles were always about preserving appearances, never about reclaiming the territory your soul has silently screamed for years. Carl Jung warned clearly, what you deny enslaves you. And the conflict you've suppressed for so long has already found ways to retaliate through destructive relationships, silent self-sabotage, emotional illnesses without names, but rooted deeply in the fertile soil of repression. There's a hidden part of you, buried beneath the compliant persona, craving more than mere peace. It desires absolute emotional mastery. A part that feels most alive in confrontation, that pulses with vitality precisely when it steps onto the battlefield to defend what belongs to it. Perhaps that explains the subtle discomfort, always in periods of seemingly perfect calm. Deep down, you know that tranquility is false, that somewhere a war rages without your presence. What wounds you isn't the war itself, but the haunting awareness that you never had the courage to fight. You've always sensed something was wrong with this ideal of peace at any cost. Maybe you even blamed yourself, convinced something was broken within you because you couldn't perfectly align with the narrative of universal harmony. But the problem was never you. War was never the error. The mistake was believing your nature was peaceful, when in truth, your essence is fiercely combative. Be honest with yourself now. When you close your eyes, you don't dream of escaping war. You dream of winning it. You no longer wish to be spared from conflict. You crave mastery over it. And perhaps for the first time in a long while, you are finally ready to accept this truth without guilt, without apologies, because what seemed your greatest weakness is actually the only strength capable of returning you to authenticity. Ready to begin the real war? From childhood, the lesson drilled into your heart was that love came with conditions: quiet compliance, gentle smiles, agreeable nods. Your mind, fragile and eager for acceptance, quickly understood the unwritten rules. Confrontation meant rejection, so you adapted, burying every natural instinct to push back, speak your truth, and defend your emotional territory. You became not peaceful, but passive, not mature, but muted. Slowly, imperceptibly, you began mistaking this profound repression for inner harmony, unaware that beneath this forced calmness lay layers of unresolved conflict. What society praised as maturity was actually a sophisticated act of emotional self-abandonment. The world taught you to fear your own aggression, your righteous anger, your intuitive impulse to confront injustice, disrespect, or manipulation. Each suppressed reaction built another internal wall, distancing you from your authentic strength. Now, whenever the impulse to defend yourself arises, it's met with panic, guilt, and shame. You've labeled this instinctual urge to fight back as dysfunctional, as something inherently flawed. But this is the great psychological error that has quietly eroded your strength. Believing that conflict is unnatural, that war is an aberration of your spirit. This belief doesn't just rob you of your emotional sovereignty, it actively weakens you, turning you into easy prey for those who sense your inability to stand firm. Your silence in moments demanding assertiveness, your polite acceptance of mistreatment under the guise of keeping peace, has consistently sent signals to those around you that your boundaries are negotiable. And every time you sacrificed your dignity to avoid conflict, another piece of your identity fragmented silently, leaving behind confusion and exhaustion. But conflict isn't your problem. It's your salvation. Your impulse to confront, to defend, to assert boundaries isn't a psychological dysfunction. It's your primal instinct to protect your emotional integrity. Your body and soul aren't wired to surrender endlessly without retaliation. They are designed for healthy conflict, for clearly articulated resistance, and for battles that protect your essential worth. It was trauma, not your nature, that conditioned you to fear your own strength, to mistrust the instincts meant to ensure your survival. Consider this. Your exhaustion doesn't stem from confronting others too often. It's from consistently betraying yourself to maintain an illusion of peace. The price of emotional appeasement has always been your sense of self-respect, self-worth, and inner coherence. And every day spent pretending peace at the expense of authenticity deepens your silent despair, reinforcing the lie that conflict is somehow beneath you, a flaw to correct, rather than a strength to reclaim. But imagine, just for a moment, reclaiming the natural impulse you've spent your life suppressing. Imagine the relief of finally standing firm, speaking your truth clearly, unapologetically, without shrinking into fear. Imagine embracing conflict as your right, your instinctual power to protect and reinforce who you truly are, no longer weakened by the toxic illusion that peace must always mean surrender. Because the war within you was never the mistake, It was believing peace required your silence that robbed you of strength. True maturity is recognizing that authentic peace isn't built on passive compliance, but on the fearless expression of your boundaries. If this resonated with you deeply, consider subscribing and gently tapping the like button. It helps us reach others who are silently battling the same unseen wars, reminding them and you that conflict, when embraced wisely, can become your greatest strength. You were taught to behave, not to question too much, not to raise your voice, to be polite, agreeable, composed. And somewhere along the way, you absorbed a belief that has quietly been dismantling your strength. That morality, being good, being liked, being approved, was more important than being whole. And so you began to amputate parts of yourself, just to fit inside the frame of what others called virtue. But let's tear this illusion apart. The moral code you inherited is not a universal truth. It's a contract, a strategy, a form of control. Hobbes didn't see morality as an idealistic compass. He saw it as an agreement, forged in fear, designed to keep chaos at bay. Not because it was right, but because it was useful. And once you understand that, you begin to see that much of what you call goodness may actually be self-erasure wrapped in social reward. Think about it. How many times have you swallowed your anger just to keep the peace? How often have you said yes when your entire body screamed no? How many boundaries did you let people trample just to appear patriot, loving, or spiritually evolved? That's not morality. That's conditioning. And the more you comply, the more you disappear. This is the moral inheritance that's been quietly sabotaging your power. It teaches you that confrontation is wrong, that anger is immature, that walking away is unkind. But the truth is, confrontation is often the birthplace of clarity. Anger, when unfiltered by shame, is often a compass. And walking away is sometimes the most honest form of self-respect you'll ever practice. The system you grew up in doesn't want you fierce. It wants you domesticated. It wants you digestible. It wants you to mistrust your instincts and bow to an external script of rightness. But every time you obey that script at the cost of your intuition, you fracture yourself a little more. Until one day, you no longer recognize the version of you that's always smiling, always yielding, always pleasing, yet chronically depleted. This is why you explode in silence, why your nervous system stays in alert, even when nothing seems wrong. It's the side effects of moral suppression, the cost of constantly abandoning your real response in favor of the correct one. Over time, this repression doesn't create peace. It breeds illness, emotional, physical, existential. The tragedy? You thought this made you stronger. You believed self-denial was a sign of virtue, but in truth, it's the slow erosion of your inner fire. The truth is that you were trained to fear your own intensity, to distrust your inner sword. You were taught that setting a boundary was too much, that saying no was aggressive, that protecting yourself was selfish. But let me ask you, who benefits from that belief? Certainly not you. Certainly not the version of yourself that knows when something's off, when someone is crossing a line, when your energy is being siphoned. The ones who benefit are the ones who get to keep crossing your boundaries while you apologize for bleeding. So maybe it's time to question the moral inheritance you never chose. Maybe it's time to remember that real power is not the absence of anger, but the mastery of it. That goodness without backbone is not goodness. It's submission in disguise, and you were never meant to be tame. They taught you to seek peace. They said the highest form of evolution is serenity, that true maturity is the ability to stay calm no matter what. but deep down, you've always felt something didn't quite fit. There's a quiet fire in you that never fully went out, a hunger not for stillness, but for command. And here's the truth that no one dares to say out loud. You don't want harmony. You want emotional dominance. Not over others, over the storm inside you. You want to stop trembling in situations that should never have had that much power. You want to stop shrinking in the face of confrontation. Stop silencing yourself in rooms that don't deserve your politeness. You want to walk into the chaos and not lose yourself. That's not peace. That's sovereignty. The lie they sold you is that seeking harmony is the goal. But what they never told you is that most people who live in peace are just expertly dissociated. They don't feel calm. They've just become numb. They haven't transcended anger. They've buried it so deep that even their truth can't find them. And this is what you've tried to emulate. A version of balance that isn't real, just repression dressed in spiritual language. You've seen it in yourself. That sick feeling after being too agreeable, too soft, too silent. The delayed rage that shows up days later because you didn't speak in the moment. The resentment that builds under your skin while you smile and nod. The regret of knowing what you should have said, but didn't. And none of that pain comes from being too emotional. It comes from betraying your own power in the name of harmony. What you actually want is clarity, groundedness, a voice that doesn't shake, a presence that doesn't apologize for existing. You want to know that when tension rises, you don't disappear. That your nervous system doesn't hijack you. That you can hold your ground without needing to raise your voice. That's what emotional dominance looks like. Not coldness, but containment. Not avoidance, but control. But here's the catch. That kind of power doesn't come from pretending to be peaceful. It comes from walking through your own fire, from facing the chaos head-on instead of spiritually bypassing it, from learning to sit in the discomfort of your truth without rushing to make everyone else comfortable. True strength isn't found in keeping the waters calm, it's in becoming the anchor when everything around you shakes. This is why harmony, as it's usually defined, is a myth, because it asks you to deny the very parts of yourself that are built for confrontation. It asks you to turn down your volume, to package your emotions, to tame your reactions so that the world remains undisturbed. But what if your disturbance is sacred? What if the chaos you've been taught to suppress is the birthplace of your voice? You're not here to be pleasing. You're not here to be manageable. You're not here to be the emotional support system for a system that thrives on your silence. You're here to be whole, and that includes the version of you that knows how to confront, how to protect, how to command. Because when you stop craving harmony, you start becoming someone who doesn't flinch, who doesn't freeze, who no longer trades authenticity for approval. And in that space, you stop surviving emotional battles and start winning them. There comes a point where something inside you goes quiet, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. You no longer need to explain yourself. Not because you don't have reasons, but because you finally understand. Justification is a trap, a loop designed to keep you proving your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. And when you break that loop, a new kind of strength is born, the quiet force of someone who no longer seeks permission to exist. You've probably felt it before, the pressure to narrate every move, to soften your truths so they don't sound too harsh, to explain your distance, your silence, your no, as if your boundaries must come with an emotional essay to be valid. You learned early that being understood was the safest way to avoid conflict, so you explained, and explained, and explained, until you didn't know who you were without the justification. But over time, something shifted. You realize that people don't misunderstand you because you're unclear. They misunderstand you because it benefits them. As long as you keep explaining yourself, you stay open, accessible, negotiable. And the truth is, some people don't want your clarity, they want your compliance. They don't want to understand you, they want you to stay small enough to be controlled. This is where silence becomes sacred. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of self-possession. You begin to see that you don't owe anyone access to your process. That your decisions, your shifts, your presence or absence don't require explanation. Not when they're rooted in truth, not when they come from alignment. And in that realization, you stop being reactive and start becoming immovable. War isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the decision not to reply. Sometimes it's walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes it's holding a boundary so clearly that it never even has to be spoken. That's the power of someone who has nothing to prove. Someone who has traded performance for presence. Of course, not everyone will like this version of you. They'll call you distant, cold, selfish. But those are just the names people give to what they can't control. Let them talk. You're not here to be digestible. You're not here to explain your evolution to those committed to misunderstanding you. You're here to reclaim your time, your space, your energy. And if that costs you connection, it's a cost worth paying. Because what you gain in return is priceless. Peace without pretense, movement without guilt, clarity without commentary. You stop asking for permission to feel what you feel, to need what you need, to be where you are. You stop narrating your every emotional step like a tour guide in your own life. And the beauty of this silence? It doesn't mean nothing's happening. It means everything is. Internally, tectonic plates are shifting. Identity is consolidating. Boundaries are crystallizing. And the world begins to sense it, even if they can't name it. They feel your energy no longer leaks. They notice your absence more than your presence. They realize that when you're quiet, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're done. You've spent enough time justifying your boundaries, over-explaining your wounds, softening your truths. Now, you let your silence carry the weight your words no longer need to. And in that silence, you become a presence no one can shake. You've been fighting a war without realizing it. Not in the loud, obvious way, but in every moment you smiled while something in you fractured. Every time you stayed silent when you should have drawn a line. Every time you put others first and called it love when it was really surrender. You are the battlefield, your body is the terrain, and your soul, it's the soldier that's been bleeding quietly for years. You live like a soldier who forgot they were once a general. You learned how to survive, how to stay low, how to read the room, how to anticipate danger. But in the process, you abandoned the part of you that leads, decides, commands. You built trenches inside yourself, places to hide the rage, the grief, the boundaries you were never allowed to set. And now, every relationship, every challenge, every interaction becomes a reenactment of a war that never really ended. You keep expecting peace to come from outside, from others behaving better, loving deeper, understanding more. But peace doesn't live there. Because the real conflict isn't with them, it's with the roles you keep replaying. You become the fixer, the appeaser, the forgiver, and it drains you. Not because you're too sensitive, but because you're carrying the weight of a battle that requires a new strategy, not more endurance. Here's the truth. As long as you avoid the war inside, you'll keep meeting it outside. You'll keep attracting people who mirror your unresolved chaos. You'll keep entering situations that trigger your deepest fears. Not because life is cruel, but because it's consistent. It reflects what you've normalized. And if you've normalized self-betrayal, that's what will keep returning. The field of battle isn't out there. It's between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Between the version of you that performs and the one that's been silenced. And until you reconcile those two, you'll live in a constant state of emotional warfare, exhausted, confused, reactive, always on edge, always waiting for the next hit. But the moment you turn inward, not with judgment, but with strategy, you begin to reclaim command. You start seeing the patterns, the old triggers, the unspoken loyalties to pain. And from that place, you stop reacting and start deciding. You stop bracing for impact and start building walls with doors, not cages. Boundaries that keep you connected to yourself, not isolated from the world. Because the war was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to wake you up. You've been taught to avoid conflict at all costs, that kindness is always better than anger, that forgiveness is more noble than rage, that walking away is only valid if it's done quietly, politely, without disruption. But somewhere along the way, this doctrine of emotional peace became something else, a system of self-erasure. And it's time to confront the paradox no one wants to name. Sometimes, violence is a form of truth. Not physical aggression, not destruction for its own sake, but the kind of symbolic, existential violence that liberates what's been imprisoned too long. The rupture of false peace. The severing of toxic bonds. The confrontation that tears down a lie you've lived in for years. There are moments when a sharp no is the most sacred act you can offer yourself. When silence becomes complicity and voice becomes a weapon of reclamation. You've likely confused suppression with strength. You've held your tongue in the name of maturity, resisted your anger in the name of virtue, stayed in the room long after your soul had left, all to be seen as composed. But there's a cost to this performance, and it's not just internal. Your body remembers. The clenched jaw, the shallow breath, the exhaustion that makes no sense. It's the tension of a war you were never allowed to fight. Foucault once said, where there is power, there is resistance. And that resistance doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it's a single decision that changes the entire dynamic of a relationship. Sometimes it's not picking up the phone, not explaining yourself, not going back to something that once defined your worth. That is resistance. And yes, it's a kind of violence. But it's the kind that ends cycles. You've been told that to be good, you must be soft. But goodness without force becomes martyrdom, and softness without discernment becomes self-neglect. You are not here to be endlessly understanding of people who weaponize your compassion. You are not here to be a safe place for those who dismantle you. There is a line, and crossing it must have consequences. Not because you are cruel, but because you are awake. The paradox is this. The more you repress your rightful anger, the more it finds unrecognizable ways to surface. You become passive-aggressive. You sabotage yourself. You implode emotionally. Or you allow others to harm you because some part of you believes you deserve it. That is the violence of repression. The slow disintegration of selfhood under the weight of false virtue. But when you stop fearing your sharpness, when you begin to wield it with awareness and integrity, something shifts. You are no longer waiting to be respected. You embody respect. You are no longer afraid to be called too much. You recognize that people who benefit from your silence will always resent your voice. and you speak anyway. There will always be those who call your boundaries dramatic, your truth inconvenient, your distance cold. Let them. You are not here to comfort their ignorance. You are here to protect your clarity. Because not all violence is destruction. Some is liberation. Some is the moment the chain snaps, the illusion dies, the soul breathes again. And maybe what you've been avoiding isn't rage. It's the part of you that still believes you don't deserve to take up space unless you're quiet. But that part is fading now. And what's rising in its place is someone who finally understands. Peace is not the absence of war. It's the power to decide which battles are no longer worth fighting and which ones are, especially the ones that set you free. You've been trained to seek stillness, to avoid friction, to call your silence strength and your emotional fatigue maturity. But if you've made it this far, you already know that version of peace isn't peace at all. It's performance, survival, a soft erasure of everything you were told was too intense, too honest, too much. And now, something in you is done pretending. Carl Jung warned us, the shadow you refuse to face becomes the weapon others use against you. And now you see it. The shadow wasn't rage. It was your refusal to speak when you were already bleeding. The wound was never just what happened. It was who you had to become to survive it. And survival is not the same as wholeness. Nietzsche saw through the illusion of harmony. He understood that what we call virtue is often a fear of our own power. That many people don't want peace. They want permission. Permission to hide. Permission to numb. But that's not why you're here. You didn't find this video because you want to stay the same. You found it because something in you is ready to stop rehearsing your pain and start commanding your presence. You're not broken for feeling like a battlefield. You're not weak for wanting to win the war within. The mistake was never the conflict. The mistake was believing you were born to avoid it. And now that illusion is breaking. When you finally stop chasing external peace, you start building internal dominance. The kind that doesn't flinch when misunderstood, that doesn't collapse when judged, that doesn't shrink just to be accepted. Because the moment you reclaim your own intensity, you stop living to be tolerated and start living to be whole. So if this video felt like it named a war you've been fighting quietly, subscribe. Not for numbers, not for applause, but because this space was built for those who are done apologizing for their depth. Leave a comment. Say what you've never said. It's not just a reply, it's resistance. A mark that says, I see it now, I'm ready. And if you're looking for more, this channel is filled with mirrors, with maps, with ideas that don't comfort but confront. Videos that name the unspoken, that peel back the silence, but offer not healing, but awareness. Because from awareness, real change begins. Because in the end, you are not broken for feeling like a battlefield. You are a mirror cracked by silence, finally choosing to shatter not for destruction, but for release. And now, the only question left is, will you keep patching the cracks? Or will you let them become your edge?